What's up, guys? Jeremy here. I am a financial advisor. I manage money professionally for my clients. And before I was a financial advisor, I was a pastor. Today, in this video, I want to kind of merge those two vocations for you. And I want to illustrate for you through some biblical case studies how and why God's economy, the Bible's description of economy, is built on borrowing. It is built on borrowing and lending. And the reason I want to dive into this is because that's kind of a hot take in Christian worlds and subcultures. Often borrowing is demonized and considered a bad decision, an immature decision. But what we're going to see is that in the Bible, God actually makes um, a lot of pathways to encourage and to foster more borrowing and lending as a way to stimulate economic growth, as a way to give an opportunity to those who are in financial lack, and as a way for those who are in extreme surplus to express generosity. Those who are in extreme surplus are not expected to give their money away. In fact, they are expected to lend money, to give seed, to invest, to lend to those who are in lack. So if you are in a position where you're maybe not in extreme poverty, but you were saying, hey, compared to where I want to be, and let's say where you want to be is financially independent or incredibly wealthy or to own your life outright. Say, I want to be in that position and I am not there yet. The way you are going to get to that position is a combination of two things under the umbrella of the favor of God, his blessing, right? That's the only real way. Everything's in vain. If you're in opposition to the Lord, I don't know how to create a clear and stable and sure path for you. But under his blessing, you basically have creating wealth, right? Let me say it this way, creating value, utilizing assets productively, right? And borrowing assets to then fuel this value creation. So historically, that's going to be a lot of um, very small business. Hey, I need to borrow some money to buy some wood so that I can craft it into a chair so that I can sell that chair for profit and I'll pay you back at the end of it. Right? If you are in lack or if you are wanting to ascend a wealth spectrum, the way that you do it is by responsibly borrowing. Using the borrowing in itself does not make you rich, okay? I am not trying to just say, hey, go borrow money and then you're wealthy. What makes you rich under the umbrella of God's blessing, of course, is your value creation. It's your utilization of assets. But if you are in lack, how are you going to utilize $5 to ascend an economic spectrum? You're not going to. You cannot become wealthy without leveraging time, relationships, and in particular, money. Of course, hypothetically, you can. There are ways, but the general theme that we see in scripture is, hey, once you have developed a skill that is valuable, borrow assets, fuel that skill, whether it's a trade, whether it's livestock or farmland, whether it's rental properties, whether it's investing, even in the stock market, right? If you can borrow at 10%, invest, appreciate it 20%, pay off the difference, you are creating real value in that effort. So let's dive into some scriptures that talk about how the economy is set up. I got a lot for you today because I don't want to sell you short. Okay. So let's just start off with some rules about debt. Don't charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You can charge a foreigner, but not a fellow Israelite. So from person of God to person of God, do not charge interest. Don't be loaning money out, trying to get every dollar you can out of it. If you want to do that for those who are outside of the family of God, God's like, hey, go ahead. You know, but as it relates to my people, I want you to lend. I want you to lend, not right to get something out of it, but to give something. I want more people to be able to borrow more. That's essentially what God is saying. If you flip this to the borrower's perspective, God's saying, I'm trying to create a pathway where borrowing is affordable because that is going to empower people with the opportunity to create wealth. Exodus 22. If this one's so interesting, just a funny specific rule. If anyone borrows an animal from their neighbor and it's injured or dies while the owner is not present, they must make restitution. You got to make it right. If you borrow something and it whatever you lose it while you are borrowing it, you got to pay it back. But if the owner's also there with you, it's not on you. Okay, but if you hired the animal, the money paid for the hire covers the loss. Again, all I really want you to extrapolate from this is God's intention in creating his economy is to normalize borrowing. It is not like, hey, don't lend out your animal. It's like, hey, if someone needs to borrow an animal, let them borrow it. Don't even charge them interest on borrowing it. Just they'll bring it back, right? If they don't, they got to pay you for that thing. And guess what? If it dies and you were there too, that's not on them, that's on you. And to pay for like, hey, I want to rent your animal. God's like, hey, if the animal dies, like that's you were running a business, okay? You were trying to make money on lending at on a rental business, an animal rental business. And if you want to, fine, but I'm just saying you take the risk then because you decided to engage in a for-profit enterprise when you could have just loaned it out. It's almost like God's encouraging borrowing as, hey, if you are someone with assets, you might want to just lend and let people borrow instead of making everything a tit for tat financial exchange. Because guess what? The people that are lower in the economic spectrum, they might not be able to afford to rent out your animal. And is the suggestion from God, hey, they got to work extra overtime, nights and weekends, and they should be only eating one meal a day so that they can save up so they can rent out the animal? No, God's like, just loan out the animal, right? It's going to help them. God's not trying to enslave his own people to his people through debt, but he's saying, hey, just let the economy flow, let it go, let it grow. Leviticus 25. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and they are unable to support themselves among you, help them. Do not take interest or any profit from them. So this is interesting. So now not only are you not allowed to loan out money for interest to an Israelite, but you also cannot sell them food at a profit. So just another specific rule that highlights, I think very clearly, that God is not anti-debt. He is anti-predatory, vulturous lending, no doubt about it. And why is he against that? Because his heart is with compassion for the poor, and he wants the poor to be able to get debt. He wants them to be able to borrow. The problem is not the borrowing, the problem is the vulturous, oppressive lending. but actually he wants to get rid of the vulturousness to increase the lending. And even the business practices saying, hey, if you know that they are so poor that they can't even support themselves, interestingly, again, he's not saying you have to give them your food. He's not saying you're responsible for their poverty, but he's saying, hey, just sell them the food at cost. Just sell them the food at cost. Lend to them with no interest. You don't have to give them the money, but just lend to them with no interest. So fascinating. When you make Deuteronomy 24, when you make a loan of any kind to your neighbor, do not go into their house to get what is offered to you as a pledge, or don't go get the collateral. Instead, stay outside, let the neighbor to whom you are making the loan bring the pledge out to you. And if the neighbor is poor, do not go to sleep with their pledge in your possession. Return their cloak by sunset so that your neighbor may sleep in it. Then they will thank you, and it will be regarded as a righteous act in the sight of the Lord your God. So don't hold on to collateral if they are particularly poor. But is God saying, hey, if they're particularly poor, they probably shouldn't be borrowing money? No, he's saying the poorer they are, the easier you need to make it for them to be able to borrow money. That's how God is setting up his economy. Keep going. It says, do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is a fellow Israelite or if they're a foreigner. Either way, do not take advantage of a hired worker. Pay them their wages each day before sunset because they are poor and counting on it. Otherwise, you will be guilty of sin. So, isn't this so interesting? In a capitalist society, often someone who is poor, the recommendations that they get from people is you just need to work harder. And hey, I'm sorry, it's minimum wage, it's $7 an hour, and you're still liable. There's no benefits, whatever, yada yada. But that's just what you got to do. You got to put in those 80-hour weeks. What do you think it takes? Like you got to do it. Actually, the Lord's saying you're guilty of sin if you are taking advantage of the fact that someone needs to work for money and they don't have a better option. God is aware that a pure capitalism screws over people that don't have any money. And that's why he wants to encourage the exchange of money, the lending and the borrowing. And if someone is hired because they just, I need some work, what can I do for you? He's saying don't take advantage of them. Pay them every day. Don't pay them after 2 weeks after their 2 week pay period. Pay them today, right? Ah, I'm sorry. I'm frustrated at those who use the Bible to support a stance that is very anti-debt while simultaneously very um, like putting the responsibility on someone who is poor, shaming them if they were ever to borrow, putting the responsibility on them to instead to leverage their time at an extreme level, working jobs that take advantage of them intrinsically and somehow feeling morally justified in that when already we're seeing so much instruction about borrowing and lending that's encouraged and clear caution against taking advantage of someone's labor. Let's keep going. So, how much is too much? How do you know if you borrowed more than you can handle? Well, Psalm 37 says, the wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. So if you do not repay what you borrowed, then that is how you know that you borrowed too much. Okay? Pretty simple, right? Um, Romans 13. This is also why you pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants, so give to them what you owe them. And here you see, let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. So again, don't if you have a tax liability, pay it. If you have a debt, and you have the ability to pay it and they are wanting it, it's due, right? Pay it. It doesn't mean you have to pay all your debts as soon as you possibly can, right? There's a lot of loans that are mutually beneficial that are um like if a bank gives you a mortgage, for example, they don't care if you pay it off early or not. Like it's you're not doing them wrong by making the payments according to the schedule of payments and it takes 30 years. You're not doing something more moral if you pay it off in 15 years than 30 years. What this is saying is whenever your monthly payment is due, make the payment, right? And hey, have an intention to pay it off. Don't borrow this money for this house thinking in the back of your head, I'm going to file bankruptcy and I'm going to figure out how to get out of this obligation and I'm not going to pay this. And when your taxes come due, how am I going to get out of this? And I'm not going to pay this. I'm going to kick the can down the road. No, just pay what you owe when you owe it. Proverbs 3, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you when you already have it with you. So this is, again, in the context of borrowing and lending and saying, hey, when someone comes to get what they have lent to you, whether it's money or an item, whatever it is, don't say, oh yeah, yeah, come on by another time. If you can pay it and they need it, pay it back, right? Don't withhold good. So that's how you know you're borrowing too much, is if you are trying to absolve yourself from the responsibility to pay it back in the agreed upon timely manner. Okay, that's it. It's not a numbers game, it's not a ratio. It's just, are you taking responsibility for every dollar that you borrowed? If so, you're good. There's the difference between good debt and bad debt. Is it your responsibility or is it someone else's responsibility? If it's your responsibility, it's good debt. If it's someone else's responsibility, it's bad debt. Now, how much debt do you want to take responsibility for? Now you get to make choices. But it's not about good and bad. It's not about how fast does it appreciate, but it's but it's more about what are you willing to take responsibility for. Deuteronomy 24, do not take a pair of millstones, not even the upper one, as security for a debt, because that would be taking a person's livelihood as security. So this is another niche rule, but millstones were used to make bread. And so God's saying, hey, if you are lending, you are not allowed to take this as collateral. And in the inverse, hey, if you are borrowing, do not offer your livelihood as collateral. So this is so clutch because again, sometimes we talk about depriving yourself of your needs of kind of basic human life. In modern world, that might include some form of transportation, that might include a couple more things, but basically like 3 meals a day, for example. He's saying don't give up the essentials to your life over debt. Like the debt is the debt and life is more important than the debt. This is different than how culturally we frame it, where it's like all of life is on hold, everything's on pause. We need to tackle this debt ASAP. This debt is the big deal, and your life doesn't matter until you get out of the debt. Actually, this verse is saying, hey, your life is way more important than this debt. Do not pause your life for one day or for one meal just because you owe someone money. Proverbs 11, whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer, but whoever refuses to shake hands in pledge is safe. So what did I just say? How much borrowing is too much? Whatever you are not willing to take responsibility for. And this verse kind of extends that, and it's saying, hey, do not borrow on someone else's behalf. Don't guarantee someone else's loan because of that same reason. You are not responsible for that. Do not make yourself responsible for something that you are not in control of, that you are not actually responsible for. Don't guarantee other people's debts. Don't put up your own life as collateral or to shake your hand, so to write your name on a contract for someone else's loan. Everyone is meant to take responsibility for their own financial situation. Here at Proverbs, it goes even deeper. It says, "My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, to free yourself, since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands." Not saying that you've fallen into debt. The debt isn't the ensnarement. The debt isn't what you need to free yourself from. It's your neighbor. He's saying you can't be responsible for someone else's choices. You need to be responsible for your choices. And when you guarantee a loan on behalf of someone else, you're trying to make their responsibilities your responsibilities. And if you've done that, here's the advice. Go to the point of exhaustion. Give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter. You got to convince your neighbor to get you out of that deal, is what the Bible is saying. So, how much debt is too much debt? Whatever debt you cannot take responsibility for, that is too much. So let's keep going. Deuteronomy 15. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone because the Lord's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed. Again, you can require payment from a foreigner, but not in my country, not with my people. Does this sound like a God that is anti-borrowing? No, this is a God who's putting fail safes in place to ensure the continued availability of assets for those who are in financial lack. He's saying, hey, go ahead and borrow money. I'm going to make sure my people do not take your livelihood as a security. I'm going to make sure my people do not charge you interest. And you know what? If 7 years goes by and you still can't pay it off, I'm just going to wipe it. I am not going to let you stay enslaved by debt. I'm going to let you borrow and I'm going to let people lend as I intended it to be, which is to stimulate prosperity, to stimulate economic growth, to empower the work of your hands. So keep going. Leviticus 25. If any of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells themselves to you, do not make them work as slaves, but treat them as hired workers. So get this. If you get so poor that what? That you would sell yourself. What is selling yourself? It's basically no one wants to hire you, right? There is no job for you. You have no assets to speak of. Maybe you're a criminal, maybe whatever. Crazy, horrible circumstances have happened to you. You know what you can do? You can borrow against your future labor. You can take a payment right now for work that you are going to do in the future. And this was not something you would want to do, right? This isn't like, oh, if you're worth 100 million and you're trying to become worth 100 billion, here's the key: sell yourself into slavery. Here's the key: you gotta take out a bigger loan. Like, no, you would never want to sell yourself. But if you're at the bottom of the bottom, you know what's a great option? To borrow against your future labor. Go ahead and sell yourself. Take a payment for work that you're going to do in the future. And you know what? I'm going to make sure that you are treated respectfully, that you're treated as if you're a hired worker. Even though this person does not want to necessarily give you a job straight up, I'm going to ask that they treat you with the same conditions that they treat their other employees, even though your status is actually less. Because guess what? If you sell yourself, you're gonna you're not gonna get the fair present value for if they had hired you for 10 years, right? You're gonna sell yourself for pennies on the dollar. But even still, you can borrow against your future, even though no one wants to employ you. Can you imagine if we had that in today's world? If you were unemployed, maybe you're homeless, maybe you have a horrible track record with drugs or something, like there's no economic interest from those who have assets to offer you work for for it to be almost like normalized and required that still you can receive a lump sum payment. Still you can borrow. And what happens is the borrowing is the goal. Aha, now some people get to just get more and more and more slaves. No, this is God's way to give people a way up, a way out, and a way up. The goal is not to keep people enslaved forever. The goal is, even if no one wants to hire you, I'm still going to let you borrow so that you can get assets, so that you have a chance to redeem your economic circumstances. And I'll prove it to you. Check it out a few verses later. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor, sells some of their property, guess what? Their family, etc., can redeem it. And if there's no one to redeem it, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, then they can buy back the stuff that they sold. So if someone's borrowing against their property because they're poor, guess what? If they do that and later on they prosper, aka they took the assets, they grew them in value, they created wealth, you can buy back whatever it was that you sold. And it's not just for property, it's also for those that sell themselves into slavery. If a foreigner becomes rich and your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to the foreigner. So now we're not even talking God's people to God's people. We're saying if an Israelite sells themselves to the foreigner, right? They borrow against their future earnings at pennies on the dollar. Guess what? They still can be bought out of that slavery. And here's all the people that are allowed to buy them out. It says, or if they prosper, they may redeem themselves. And then here's how they can value the uh, the price at which they can buy themselves out of slavery. Isn't it interesting that even someone who has sold themselves, borrowed, right, against their future at pennies on the dollar, even they could prosper. Why is it that they would prosper? Because they borrowed. Because they borrowed. Does that mean everyone's just rushing at the door to sell themselves? No, you would much rather have your freedom, right? But when push comes to shove, how badly do you want to rise from the current economic situation that you are in? And to that extent, you have to consider these two things under the umbrella of God's blessing, which is how am I going to acquire assets, borrow assets, and then how am I going to utilize what I borrowed to fuel a machine of value creation? A couple more verses for you. Check this out. So if any of your people, Hebrew, again, if anyone sells themselves to you, and then in the seventh year, you are to let them go free. Does that sound like a God that's trying to get people to make sure they never do this? Does it sound like this shame situation of like, oh, they borrowed? It was shameful, of course, to have to sell yourself into slavery, but that's a social shame, not a God shame. God's saying, hey, let them go free. Everyone gets a way out. Everyone gets a way to access funds that they were not able to earn themselves through their own efforts and wages, but actually we can accelerate their prosperity by encouraging borrowing and lending. And then check it out. It says, but if your servant says to you, I do not want to leave you because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, then here's how you can make them a servant for life. So again, is this whole slavery deal, it's just interesting, right? And I'm talking about biblical Old Testament times. I'm not talking about any instances of unwanted, forced modern slavery. But what I'm saying is these people who borrowed against their future at pennies on the dollar, some of them are so well off that they do not even want to leave. Crazy, right? Does that sound just crazy? Now, here's a huge chapter that I'm not going to read all of, but in Deuteronomy 28, you see all these blessings for the people of God. And it's like all these blessings are going to come, like the fruit of your womb, the crops of your land, the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds, the lambs of your flocks, your basket, your kneading trough, like basically everything you do, right? Your barns, everything you put your hands to. This is how you get rich. This is how you accumulate wealth. It's through creating value, right? But creating value requires assets. It's the two things. But all these blessings are, hey, the things that you are doing to try to create value, God's like, I'm gonna breathe wind in your sails. I'm gonna be for you. God's like some of y'all might know that in the desert, the 40 years of wandering, that God would drop manna from clouds and people would eat bread that fell from the sky for their daily bread, right? There for their food. And so many Christians still today, they think by being Christian, it means I need to make sure I avoid money, I avoid debt. I'm going to just do my life, spend whatever I make, never accumulate wealth because I think wealth is bad, never borrow money to fuel my wealth creation because I think borrowing is bad. And then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pray that God just gives me money. But the blessing of God is not the manna. The manna was a temporary solution. It was a devaluation of the people. Like it is better if they can grow crops, if they can grow livestock and herds and lambs, if they can have land, if they can have barns that are overflowing, if they can put their hands to work and create value, that is the blessing of God is I want to breathe on your wealth creation. I want to breathe on your work. The manna was a temporary test, a temporary solution. Like, I'm not going to let you die out and starve. So, guess what? Here's some money from heaven. Here's some bread. I'm going to just drop it on the ground for you. But the big plan is I want to work through you. And what I'm saying is, through all these laws we're reading, is that obviously borrowing and lending was normal. It was encouraged. There's ways to make sure it doesn't turn vulturous and treacherous. And even if someone borrows more than they can afford, still there are ways for them to be forgiven, for them to be released, and for them to have another chance to then borrow again and create value again. And the reason I'm bringing up this verse in chapter 28 is because after all these promises of all these things that are going to go well for them, check it out. He starts throwing out some curses. He's like, if you follow me, right, you're always going to be at the top, never at the bottom. You'll lend to many nations, but borrow from none. So no one else is going to get to take advantage of your need to borrow. The borrowing and lending is going to happen internally. And you know what's going to happen from that? I'm going to prosper you to where you'll never even think about borrowing one day. You know what I wouldn't do if I had $100 billion? I wouldn't be borrowing. You know what I mean? Like I've got plenty of fuel, right? So you'll lend to many and borrow from none is not like lending is good and borrowing is bad. It's like the Lord's way of saying you will be wealthy as a whole group. And the way that we're going to do that is by fostering borrowing and lending within you and then getting to work, creating value. I'm going to give you assets and I'm going to teach you how to use those assets to create more value. But all these curses, they're crazy. Everything you do is going to be cursed. And then they get just wild. Like, let's read some of these. So you're going to be defeated before your enemies. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt and with tumors and festering sores and the itch from which you cannot be cured. You'll be pledged to be married to a woman, but another will take her and abuse her. Your ox will be slaughtered right before your eyes. The Lord will drive you and the king you set over you to a nation unknown to you or your ancestors. Like horrible, horrible curses for these people if they turn their backs on God. Why am I reading this? Because the very last curse, the cherry on top, you know what the worst thing of all of these things that he says is, check it out. Look at all these curses, guys. The Lord will send you back in ships to Egypt on a journey I said you should never make again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as slaves, but no one will buy you. That is the tip of the spear. That's the worst, right? We just talked about all these verses, how God's encouraging the ability of and availability of funds for those who are in lack to be able to ascend into a higher economic spectrum. And then all these curses, all these dramatic, suspenseful, horrible things, if they don't follow God. And you know what the worst thing is? No one's going to buy you. What does that mean? You're not even going to get to be able to borrow money. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing it? God's economy is built around borrowing and lending to fuel economic development, to create a more opportunistic playing field for more people to get to utilize those assets in ways that create value. That is the theme that you see in scripture. And hopefully you saw it today too. Let me know if you did or didn't. If you have anything that you think very differently about, would love to hear it. But hey, that's my take. Take it or leave it. I will talk to y'all again soon. I appreciate it.